Welcome to this session. My name is Martin Klaus. I'm with VMware Product Marketing. I'm on the management team. The topic of this session is virtualization management. Now, I have here with me a panel of customers who have implemented virtualization management in their environment. And so I'd like to introduce real quick Tim Mersel from Medtronic, John Schulman from SAIC, and Robert Thomas from Christus Health in San Antonio. So what we'd like to explore is the impact of virtualization and cloud infrastructure on IT management. Before we get started, maybe hands as to how many are 25% virtualized, 25% or more. Come on, guys. Everybody's got more than 25%. 50% or more? 75%? So most of you guys are somewhere between 50 to 60 to 75% virtualized. Now, what we discovered as we talked to customers is as you deploy more and more virtualization, a couple of things are happening. You will probably manage more virtual machines. You'll be supporting more users. You will have to deal with higher expectations in terms of quality of service. But you don't necessarily get to hire a lot more admins. The budgets are not increasing either. So the key question is, what do people do in order to manage their virtual infrastructure more efficiently? So we decided to ask customers to answer their question. And there are a couple of questions that we'd like to get the answers for. For example, how do you actually keep up with the growth? How do you increase the ratio of VMs per admins? What did you do to keep up with that pace? Are you doing anything differently from a compliance standpoint? What if you have compliance requirements, regulatory requirements? What are you doing differently in order to meet the expectations and requirements from the auditors? But also, how do you improve IT service delivery overall? Turnaround times in terms of how quickly you can satisfy the needs of your internal customers. And so in the next 30 minutes or so, each of the panelists will give a brief presentation about their environment, what they've done. And we want to highlight not just technology and tools, but we also want to talk a little bit about process and people. Which processes have changed in the environment? What's different? What about the people? Did roles change? Do you now have people focus on different aspects of their job or expanding their roles? So we want to take a broad look at in management, but we also want to take a look at technology and tools and understand what people have done and how it's working out for them. And then we move towards a discussion, a Q&A that you should also participate in. In order to move through the panelist presentations as quickly as possible, I'd like to ask you to hold your questions until the end, and then we open it up for Q&A. Okay? So first, I'd like to introduce Tim Mersel, and he is a Data Center Operations Supervisor with Medtronic in Minnesota.
Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Tim Mersel. I have been a Senior Systems Engineer with Medtronic now for about 7 years. Just recently, I've actually moved into the management role. So as my colleagues are here to heckle me, if we get into more details as far as what's happening today, I'll probably bring them in. But here, I'm going to talk about a little bit our agenda very, very quickly because we have two other people here that need to speak after me. But just really who is Medtronic, spend a couple of minutes there, our environment, our layout, where we want to be, the requirements, why we chose Capacity IQ and AppSpeed and what we're doing with it, and kind of some of the results that we've actually seen. So Medtronic as a whole, we're about 38 to 39,000 people worldwide. Again, 120 countries, 270 locations, lots of facilities, lots of sites. So the way that we architect and we design our ESX infrastructure is actually very different than, as we say, Joe's Bait Shop that has 4 or 5 or 6 ESX hosts. Going back to what we do, this is one of those marketing slides that we have to put in here. A lot of chronic conditions. Our whole idea is to alleviate pain, extend life, and restore health. But for the fun stuff, our ESX environment right now. Our ESX environment, we have about 22 locations that actually has ESX infrastructure. So basically 22 locations that has some sort of shared network storage and allows us to build some ESX hosts. We're probably around 1,000 sockets. That's about 450 to 500. Most of our boxes are actually 2 CPU. We do have some old 8-socket hosts. I'm running about 3,200 virtual machines worldwide. Looking at the ratios between about 450 to 500 servers to ratio of virtual machines is not the greatest. But again, we are virtualizing a lot of tier 1 apps, virtualizing a lot of desktops. Our production is probably around 16 to 1. Our test and dev is now about up to 25 to 1 possibly. And then virtualization numbers over the years, obviously starting back at VMworld. I look back to VMworld Las Vegas and what we were for percentage of virtualization compared to where we are today has been really, really huge. Management, for us, they've kind of bought in on this virtualization first strategy. That has definitely helped us in growing our virtualization. But we're hoping that we can actually get to a kind of a virtualize only. We still aren't there yet. Of course, all of us would like to be there. But someday, we'll hope. And we also have a really, really strong ESXi deployment. I had a colleague that was just in this room on Monday morning, talked about our ESXi deployment. That's really helped us out as far as we build out all these systems. So where do we want to be? I don't think that we're going to be the 95, 98, 99% virtual as some companies are. We're just simply too big. But we're really hoping for 85% virtual. And I think that we could, we're going to get there with some other tools and some other things that VMware has, because we just can't say we're going to be 85% virtual by tomorrow. Proactive manageability for all systems. Won't we all like to know what happens before it happens in our environment? It's just a matter of being proactive and not reactive to how things work. Sell business on tier 1. We're getting there. I'm not going to be up here and say that we have absolutely every business unit completely sold on virtualization. I think that's politics. I think that's internal politics. Are we getting closer? Are some of the things that I have now that I can prove back to the application people helping? They definitely are. So we're getting better with our tier 1 apps and the Exchange, especially SAP, and all those things in the management in those areas are actually buying in now. And build VMs. This is my biggest thing is I'm trying to build VMs based on what the customer needs and not what the customer wants. All these customers always want more and more and more. No matter what, they want more. They think 4 is better than 2. They think, 2 is better than 1. And they want a lot, and we don't really necessarily need to give them that. So what happens now is with some of the things that I'm doing is we can report back to these application owners and kind of limit what they want and more about giving them what they actually need. Business requirements. I think our business requirements are very similar to every single person in this room. Everyone is different, but again, we're all the same. I mean, of course there's high demand. There's highly regulated environment. I'm in healthcare. If you look at hospitals and everything else, it's a huge regulated environment. Performance metrics, managers come to me saying, I need performance metrics. I want proactive manageability. I want you to do more with less. And of course, there's always the application owners out there, and I could ask every one of you, there's always the application owner that thinks that their application is the most important application in the entire company, so we should all drop our hat and do whatever they need. But again, it's a matter of trying to figure out what they need and what they want and give them a solution. So why did we choose Capacity IQ? Really, it's about manageability, being proactive, kind of looking to see what we have. Very good with reports and graphs. I call them management graphs. As a manager can look at these graphs, and they're very, very intuitive. They just, 4 CPUs, 1 CPU, 2 to 1. It's very, very simple. Not saying, now that I'm in management, very simple management graphs. Intelligent project planning, we've used it to actually plan out future farms, kind of relating to see what's going to happen with them. Right-sizing VMs. Normally, and I'm going to say it's the same case, in the past, we were probably 95 over-provisioned. On the under-provisioned side, probably not as much. I'd like to say that our 95% over-provision are probably down a little bit less. I know that we still have some cleanup to do and actually right-size the VMs. Most of all, Capacity IQ is really super, super easy to integrate. It's building a net appliance, throw it in Virtual Center. You have a nice little tab. It's all in one place. Our managers actually have read access to it so they can actually load Virtual Center, go in and pull up a graph based on their farm. So it works out really well. vCenter app speed. Again, our deployment of app speed is not as big as it was for Capacity IQ, but we brought in app speed to kind of work with. We have a big forward-facing, customer-focused group, and all of that entire environment is all running on physical hardware. Their prod and test environment is actually running on, their dev and test environment is running on VMs. So we kind of use AppSpeed to kind of do this validation, kind of a before and after scenario. If we do move the production physical to production VM, kind of what it would look like. My patient management guys are here, and they've installed it. They've worked with it. The traffic is super, super minimal. It's super small footprint, and there's absolutely no agents. So as far as the simplicity of setting it up, yeah, there's some different port configurations we have to work with, but it's really, really a small footprint. So some of the things out of those, just the two small applications that we worked with is I think we're doing a lot better with proper size in VMs. I think I'm not going to say that everything is absolutely perfect and every single VM that we put out the door is proper sized. I think we definitely have to do a lot more trimming, but we're getting close. It's nice to have nice graphs so we can report back to application owners saying this is proof in the pudding, as I say. We can shave a little bit. Again, that's definitely helping with our server allocation, better use of hardware. Of course, we don't want to use hardware when it's spending all this money on hardware. I'd rather have some little bit higher ratios. Test and dev, we're up around 25 to 1, some cases 30 to 1. Our prod, we haven't really exactly trimmed all that much. Tier 1 apps, we're still trying with some of the graphs and some of the reports. We're getting more and more buy-in from some of the Tier 1 people. Exchange, I bring up. Exchange has always been, I'm not quite sure. SAP is not quite sure, but now that we have these graphs and these reports, we can kind of prove back to them that this is possible and this is what we can do. And with upper management and with our upper management buying in on it, it's really nice to go and say, well, our VP of so-and-so is supporting virtualization. We're a virtualized first strategy. I know you're an Exchange, but our direction is VM, and we're getting there. And yes, we can provide you with exactly the same thing you had in a physical world, but in a virtual world, and here's the reports and the things that we need to support you. So I think that is all that I have right now. I'm going to pass it on, and I think we're doing questions after.
Thank you.
So.
So while Tim was speaking primarily about his experience managing a very large virtual environment with 22 data centers, next one up we have John Schulman from SAIC. And if you don't know SAIC, they're a large government contractor working with the U.S. military. And John is going to speak specifically about some of these compliance and regulatory requirements that you guys have in your environment.
Well, so as Martin said, I'm with SAIC. I'm employed by them, but all of my results are not related to the company as a whole. They're all related to what we're going to call an undisclosed Joint Army-NATO-Navy facility. I'm going to speak specifically about my use of the Virtualization Configuration Manager, VCM. It's gone through some name changes, so you'll forgive me if I've just got that wrong. It just changed again on me. Just a little bit about me. We'll go over a little bit about my customer, which is the Army-Navy data center that I'm speaking about, what we're currently at, where we're trying to get, and how the tools are helping us get there, and some lessons we've learned along the way. A little bit about the customer. It is, like I said, it's a joint data processing facility. It's a little bit of an anomaly in the defense world in that the agencies are working together and actually playing quite nicely, so that's fun. What that does for me is it creates a very unique combination of heterogeneous and homogeneous environments where we have certain customer requirements that need a ton of the same thing and certain customers that are calling for one each of 50 different things. So that's really been some of the impetus for virtualization for us to try and contain that, the sprawl, the different environments. Constant project flux between the two customers, the Army and the Navy being our primary customers. There are several different commands, several different projects, upwards of almost 200 at this point, that come into us, and there'll be onesie, twosie, 4 servers here, 2 servers there, 50 servers for this one, whatever. What that does is that creates a huge server sprawl, and then when these customers sometimes shut down, sometimes their mission is completed and they want to reconsolidate and get rid of their expenditures with us, we have to maintain that sprawl. If we've used any of their systems for other applications, we have to have an easy way to identify and manage that. There's also a big push in the federal sector, and I hope that everybody in here appreciates this. It's your tax dollars to consolidate and improve efficiency, both power-wise. We have a huge push for green data centers. We're trying to reduce our footprints, and we're trying to consolidate, have less data centers do more with less processing facilities. In my environment, we have 4 distinct VMware environments. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the concept of the enclave. That's sort of a military reference term. But some of these environments have to be physically and logically segmented from each other for various reasons, compliance, regulatory, and such. We're doing it on HP blades and NetApp. That's the hardware that we've selected. It works for us. What works for us doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but we're very pleased with what we've selected. Right now, we're running about 70% virtual, which I feel, given the hands I saw earlier, is a pretty good number. I'm very pleased with the progress that we've made. We have what Tim mentioned he's working towards as a virtualize-only policy. We virtualize by default and permit only by exception. And our exceptions are only for Spark systems. We can't virtualize non-x86 hardware at this time. And we do have some legacy applications that require Spark processing. Also, high-performance standalone systems. In some cases, customer acceptance and management buy-in for running virtual as opposed to physical is not there. And because we're a customer-focused organization, we kind of have to back off if they say, oh, there's absolutely no way you can't virtualize. Most people are okay with it. Some of our customers are not. Right now, you can see we're a little bit smaller shop than Tim. We pale a little in comparison to his complexity. Have about 40 hosts, supporting about 400 guests. That's not a direct, 10 to 1 compression. It's actually more like 15 to 1 in production, slightly higher in test and dev. It's not all homogeneous. We also have one environment that has 3 VM hosts. It's only running 1 VM because we're waiting for projects to come over there. My operations team, I'm supporting all of this with about 20 administrators. That includes Windows, Unix, network, and DBAs. We have teams for each individual task. As we've been virtualizing, of course, everybody's realized this if you're doing it, that we've increased our capacity, decreased our footprint. Heat and electricity have gone way down. Capacity has gone way up. One of the biggest data points that I need to talk about is our shift from selling co-location as a co-location facility. We had previously been selling plant, network, and rack space. And we're no longer doing that. We've shifted almost entirely to a cloud, a service-oriented model, where we've gone back to selling computing time like in the mainframe days, where we'll sell our customers cycles. We'll sell them a slice of a VM, of a blade. And that causes us some problems, and that really gives us some benefits, too. Sometimes, like I said, when these customers shut down, they want their hardware back, and there's no hardware to give them. So that kind of mucks things up for us a little bit. But it's given us a lot more flexibility. It's made us a lot more agile. In the future, we're hoping to finish migrating to CNA, the full 10 gig adapter, converged network adapter environment. We're going to use a lot of Cisco equipment to reach that. We've also got a plan. I think I can reach 90% virtualization by the end of this fiscal year, owing to shutting down some of my larger physical clusters. Some of the stuff that had been resisted before has been accepted, but not all of it. And we're going to granulate our storage a little more, and we're going to enhance the presence of what is ultimately the reason for my talk, the vCenter Configuration Manager, on both our physical and our virtual assets. A couple of challenges we've run into along the way. Virtualization and security. If you guys are starting to virtualize now, or if you've been into it pretty deeply, you've realized that your sysadmins are becoming network admins, your network admins are becoming sysadmins. Everybody's roles are kind of getting mixed up as you move more virtual, because there's so much more capability inside of VMware than there ever was with a physical system. The separation of duties and the division between the network and systems administrators are really getting blurred. So maintaining the principle of least privilege in a high security environment is sort of getting more and more difficult for me. Watch out for dependencies. I don't want to go over my time, so I won't go too much into this, but we did do a large NetApp migration that required a whole filer shutdown. And NetApp is very reliant on DNS, and the DNS servers were virtual machines running inside the NetApp, so bringing everything up kind of It took us 24 hours, let's put it that way. It was a long outage. And controlling sprawl, just because we can do something does not mean that we have to do something. That means both creating VMs just because we can, just because we want to test something, just because we want to see if it runs better. That also means making VMs that are over-provisioned, like Tim spoke about with Capacity IQ. A VM doesn't need 4 CPUs. It doesn't even really need 2 CPUs. Most applications are single-threaded and work better with one thread, and your other VMs will work better if you're not overcommitting the other VMs on your system. So getting to the vCenter Configuration Manager, this is just a great product that VMware's recently acquired. It's come in through 2 different companies since I bought it over a year ago. It really helps us do a lot of security, configuration management, regulatory compliance, baselining, anything that you can think of regarding compliance and config management. It can do. We have reporting. We have configuration management where we can select changes, we can create baselines, we can apply the same change to every system all at once, we can back those changes out, we can detect if changes have been made by an unauthorized user or a user at the console. We can detect them and automatically reverse them, we can detect them and report on them. Everything is logged, which is great right from the start. Just having the log is a critical compliance measure for our DIACAP, our regulatory compliance. And we have auditing and change control, so like I said, the auditing is very important for us. Using it in the enterprise environment, this was originally a product that was designed to manage both physical and virtual machines. It's not really aware of whether or not you're managing a physical versus a virtual machine. It functions the same way on both. And that's great for us because I don't want my admins or my customers to think of a VM any differently than they do a physical machine. I want them to look at their OS. I want them to say, this is what we've got. I don't want them to think any differently than if it was an HP versus a Dell server. VMware is just another server brand. It doesn't matter. So that's the way our industry or our organization wants to think about it. We are also able to do urgent software deployment with it. This is great when we have some little one-off patch that's a massive problem for us. Adobe Acrobat, I'm sure everybody's felt that pain. If we have to deploy that to our desktops, or if we have to deploy a SharePoint patch or something that's quicker done by just rolling out a DLL or a registry hack or something like that, ActiveX killbits, things like that. It's really easy to do through this. We can also create instant deliverables for accreditation packages. So if we have to prove that we've got visibility into something, we have it thanks to this tool without any real effort other than making sure the agent is on there and talking properly. And it's also helping us track and manage our servers. By virtue of the fact that this can manage VMware hosts as well as guests, I can get some visibility into my host environment. I can say a VM's been created, a VM's been deleted, a VM's been modified. I know about that, so I don't have a problem with people changing things without telling me. Yeah, that's pretty much all for me. I'll pass it back over to Robert.
Thank you, John. Next one up is Robert Thomas from Christus Health, and Robert is enterprise architect at Christus, and he's going to talk about in more detail around the whole notion of IT service delivery. What are the services that we should offer as an organization? How do we deliver it more efficiently? How do we reclaim capacity? But also, how do we then bill and charge for some of these services that you guys are delivering?
Hi, how's everybody doing today? As Martin said, I'm the senior IT architect for Christus Health. What we're going to kind of do today is kind of give you a little company introduction, a little bit about our virtualization environment, what's key for us in our virtualization standards, and then what we're doing around virtualization management and the tools that we're using. So Christus Health is ranked number 7 nationally among Catholic health organizations. We have over 42 hospitals located in Texas, Louisiana, Mexico, New Mexico, and Utah. We have about 35,000 employees with about $4.1 billion in assets. And each of our regions is divided, or we have 8 regions. Each of those regions is its own financial entity, which is key when we talk about some of the things we're going to talk about with chargeback. We've been in the virtualization space since about 2006. We have 190 production ESX boxes, 10 test and development in a lab manager environment. about 1,600 virtual machines, 2 virtual infrastructure servers in each data center. 90% of our environment is running vSphere 4.0, 10% is running ESX 3.5. We still have some legacy that we haven't upgraded. We are averaging about 20 virtual machines per physical box. If you actually look at our numbers, those numbers will look a little off. We've got some capacity that we have in place today due to some data center consolidation that's taking place in our environment. For us, one of the biggest things that we have done is around virtualization standards. All new systems must be virtualized unless we have specific proof that it will not run in a virtual environment. So we've taken the virtualization first approach. We continue today to work with our vendors to support virtualization adoption. I don't know about you, but we still, in the healthcare space, still have a lot of vendors that still say that they don't support virtualization due to FDA requirements or other components within their products, but they don't want to say that they'll support virtualization. So that's still an ongoing issue with us in healthcare and working with our vendors to force that adoption. We at Christus Health have about 90% of our systems that follow our standards. These standards might look a little off to you. They work in our environment, but they may not work in yours. But we have a standard 1 application server. That server configuration is 1 virtual processor and 1 gig of RAM. As John mentioned, most things are single-threaded applications, so it can't use much more than that. Our second configuration is a database server, 2 virtual processors and 2 gig of RAM. And anything that is going to deviate from these standards requires management approval. So, and why this is important and what we'll talk about in Capacity IQ is that it really helps us to validate these standards. For us, the virtualization standards allow for more reliable uptime and performance of our systems. The system start at the standard, and based on performance, then it can be modified. So we're not saying we're so stringent that it has to follow the standard, but everything starts at the standard, and then based on performance data that is provided, we can modify whether it's the number of processors, the amount of memory that is allocated to that. All of our engineers can only deploy from templates. So, we've established some templates that are for the majority of our systems, and that's all our engineers can deploy. They are not allowed to actually go out and custom configure a VM. The only people that actually can modify the standards are virtualization engineers. And we've got 2 of those in our environment. So we got 2 virtualization engineers that are supporting 1,600 virtual machines and 200 ESX boxes. And then VMware, for us, is the most reliable virtualization product in our environment. I'm sure, like all of you might have multiple hypervisors in your environment, as we do. But for us, VMware has been by far the most reliable. IT service delivery at Christus Health is becoming a more and more important part of our day-to-day activities. Our executives are asking for reporting every day. They want to know what the dollars are being spent and how they're being spent. So, they're asking for reports related to the state of the environment. They want to see kind of the portal view. They don't want to get, a 500-page document about how each system is performing. They want to see some very high-level graphic type reports that they can look at very quickly and get a very high-level view into that environment. And before we started looking at some of these tools, we didn't have an automated way of generating those reports. Everything was manual. If we were asked to get a report or give some data, it was all manually gathered and put together. And as I mentioned, for us, our business units are wanting real-time data. Today, our business units get charged a flat fee based on the number of beds in the hospitals. So as I mentioned, we were broken up into 8 disparate business units. And based on how big that region is, they might get a $20 million charge a year for IT services. The other one might get $15 million, whatever the charge is, but it's a flat fee. And our business units are really pushing us to actually provide them a true consumption of IT services. The problem with that is some of our smaller business units are going to find out that they're actually consuming more IT services than our larger business units. And so the data has started, that's been coming in lately has been showing that. So, we constantly, all of us, are balancing between the capacity and over-provisioning, right? We need to understand what systems are over-provisioned. The automated process for what-if analysis related to changes in our environment. And for us, it was a reduction of clusters to kind of an N+2 for licensing reduction. I'll kind of talk about that here in a second when we talk about capacity IQ, what that what-if analysis and where that N+2 cost reduction came into play for us. And then the other thing is the end-user experience. As IT administrators, we kind of look at the data that's present in our environment. We go into Virtual Center. We look at what the performance data is showing us. But we really don't have a view into what the end-user experience is and what the end users are actually seeing. So we were looking for a tool that would actually help us understand what that end user is seeing and the ability to troubleshoot those performance issues. So for us, like everybody, Virtual Infrastructure Server was our primary management tool. We started to evaluate the new tools from VMware, and we performed 3 proof of concept jump starts. The vCenter Capacity IQ, Chargeback, and App Speed. I'm not sure if everybody understands what a jump start is, but it's an offering from VMware that allows you to actually come in, install in your environment with an engineer in your production environment or in your test, whichever you prefer, and actually get an active running application so you can actually see how it actually works in your environment. For us, that has been really key in our environment because I'm sure like everybody else, we've all gone out and bought a product based on what a vendor tells us it's going to do. We get it in the environment, we install it, and then it doesn't do what we want it to do. So for us, we've really moved to this whole jumpstart idea and making sure that it's the right fit for Chris's health. We want it installed, we want to be able to look at it, we want to make sure it's actually going to do what everybody says it's going to do. And when we do these jump starts, we actually involve cross-functional teams. We involve our management team, we involve our technical engineers, we've involved our operations folks, because we want everybody to be able to participate in those jump starts and make sure that whatever we're going to buy and purchase is actually going to meet the needs for everybody. And again, reporting is the key for management, so it was really important to involve them and make sure that the reports are going to do what they want to do. So, Capacity IQ for us. So it allows us to perform what-if scenarios, provides data to validate the performance and configuration of our solutions architects and business units. So as I talked about before, we've got some pretty stringent standards. What Capacity IQ has allowed us to do is validate those standards. Again, it's what you need versus what you want. And it's very easy to go run a report and be able to say, here's what your machine is actually using. And it's helped us really validate those standards that we have in place. And we run reports weekly for over and under provisioned virtual machines. For us, obviously based on our standards, we don't have a lot of over provisioned machines, but we on occasionally do find some under provisioned machines that we've got to move up that has really helped us as opposed to looking at 1,600 virtual machines in Virtual Center. And then for us, we've actually seen a reduction in our Microsoft ELA dollars by licensing the virtual host and allowing us to perform some what-if analysis in the reduction of our cluster sizes. As I mentioned to you, we had a large capacity within our clusters. We had more hardware than we could ever use. And what we've ended up having to do is using Capacity IQ, done some what-if analysis to shrink our cluster sizes to an N+1, N+2 configuration, and be able to actually reduce our ELA dollars spent by Microsoft in the way that we license Microsoft. And right now, we're still working on the final number, but right now we're in the $750,000 savings of those Microsoft dollars based on how we're licensing. Chargeback. For us, we're in the pilot and evaluation phase. So as part of our Jumpstart, we got it installed and we're using it today. Today, as I mentioned, the business users are getting a flat-based price on size and profitability. But our users, unlike most companies, our users are asking us to give them an accurate billing based on usage. And chargeback will allow us to accurately report based on CPU cycles or physical resource consumption. And I will tell you, for us, the response has been outstanding. First of all, finance came to us and said, we need you guys to develop a model. We came back to them after doing our jumpstart, and we provided them data within about 60 to 90 days. They were expecting us to take about a year to give them this kind of information. And by putting chargeback in place, we were able to give it to them much quicker than they were actually able to respond and figure out the model that they were going to do to charge back the customer. So we were actually ahead of finance in what they were asking for. And the only way we were able to do that was with a tool like chargeback. And so the response has been great from everybody. Our business units love it because they're actually able to see a graphical report based on what they're using. And we're looking forward to the next release of chargeback. I don't know if anybody's been in the deep dive, but for us, one of the big things that we're looking for is kind of that shared virtual machine ability to break up a virtual machine into multiple components, that if you've got several business units running on a virtual machine, be able to allocate that virtual machine that you can't do today. So in the next release, that's one of the key features for us. So then that's all I got.
Very good. Thank you, Robert. Okay, so now that we're done with the opening remarks of each of the panelists, it's time to move on to the discussion and Q&A piece. And so this is also for you guys an opportunity to ask questions of the panelists. To kick things off, perhaps a question for you, Robert. You talked about your extremely high VM per admin ratio. I don't think there are a lot of companies out there that have more VMs that they're managing per admin. So in your case, it's 800 to 1. And you talk a lot about standards now and the templates that you have. Now, are you saying that you're actually limiting choice as to what people can request from IT, or?
No, I think what we do, and I think for us, the only way, when you have that large amount, I mean, we've got some operational staff that handles the day-to-day operations. That they'll go look at some basic functions, like they troubleshoot a physical box. But when it comes to running that virtualized environment and looking at the number of ESX boxes and the number of virtual machines in the environment, the only way we can do it with most companies are understaffed. The only way we can do it with the 2 virtual engineers that we've got is to have those standards. And by having those standards, we're not saying you're limited to those standards. What we're saying is this is what you're starting off at. And when you start off at the standards and then you go from there, so we're not curbing the flexibility that folks have, but what we're trying to do is prove what you need versus, you can't hear this theme throughout all 3 of our presentations, what you need versus what you want. And by doing that, we have been able to prove at 90%, this is all you need. So by having those standards, we're able to reduce the complexity in our environment and allow less engineers to operate more machines.
This is something that I also hear consistently, that a lot of times, IT is getting asked to provide anything to application teams or to app owners or DBAs, but you have very little proof or tools to help you actually validate, is this the configuration that is really needed? And so at least you can now go back after a couple times or 30 to 60 days to see if the VMs are actually being utilized. You also talk, one more question for you, and then I move on to John and Tim. You also talk a lot about chargeback, and I think in your case, the notion of pay-as-you-go or consumption-based pricing was actually driven by your business units. Okay, now I'm not sure how a lot of you guys are, structured internally and what the dynamic's going to be for you. But one thing that I like to explore in more detail is, like, you talk a lot about work with finance and the accountants. In my experience, the accountants know accounting, but they don't know IT, and vice versa. IT knows servers, but not a lot about payback terms and so forth. How did that work? Did you send your finance guys through an IT crash course, or what happened there?
No, so in our environment, we've actually got a dedicated finance department that is specific to IT. So, one of their big goals, it's actually not an IT goal, it's actually a finance goal, that they must have a chargeback model in place by this fiscal year. And so when they approached us about, it's very easy in the physical world. Everybody knows what they're paying for physical infrastructure. The virtual infrastructure became much more of a challenge because how do you actually charge for that? I mean, there's a physical cost on a server, there's storage, there's networking. So it becomes much more difficult. And so we actually, as part of the chargeback tool, we engaged our finance to come in and help us develop the dollar figure that we charge for each one of those components. If you've been to any of the deeper dives, you actually specify the costs related to infrastructure, to personnel, to all of those components. And by involving them and getting that number, like I was saying, we were able to give them a report much faster than they ever expected us to do. And so they're actually struggling right now to get that. How do I charge the customer now?
Okay,
the IT component is now.
Right, so finance will take care of the billing, but
Correct.
they help you figure out what are some of the base rates that you should set up in the tool to help start collect the data correctly.
And to be able to do it automatically, right? I mean, very limited staff. The only way you can do it is with tool sets that can do that for you very quickly. So.
Great. So we talked. Okay, there's a question. So let me repeat that. So there was a question about chargeback. Will it actually let you set up reports for storage as well as I/O?
Right, both capacity and I/O are also.
For us, there is a storage component, and we charge it based on what has been allocated to the box. So, if you have 500 gig associated with that virtual machine, there's a cost for that 500 gig, even though you're only using 100 gig, because we've had to reserve that 500 gig as part of your virtual machine. So, thin provisioning will take care of some of that, right? But in our environment today, we are still setting that storage space, so therefore we're charging for that storage space.
Okay, great, thanks. Now let's move on to John. So you talked a lot about secure, and I'm sure that's on top of everybody's mind here who has a regulatory type background. Now, one of the key points that you made is that you're not distinguishing between physical and virtual infrastructure from a compliance standpoint or from a security standpoint. Right? Are there any new considerations that you have to make now that you're virtualizing more infrastructure? I mean, what about compliance of the hardware itself? Did you introduce new concepts, or are the auditors looking for more things in that checklist as they now investigate their virtual infrastructure as well?
Well, one of the things that's come up is, like I mentioned, the separation of privilege between network teams and systems teams. Previously, a sysadmin couldn't allocate, couldn't just stick a machine in a VLAN, couldn't just bring up network ports all they want. There was a physical cable, there was MAC, there was NAC. You had to enable the port, you had to plug it in, and now it's sort of a situation where you can just kind of say, VLAN 500, and you're there. So one of the things that we have had to do is develop some processes around who can do what and who can do what where to prevent the sysadmins, the virtual admins, from impinging upon the duties of the network admins. So that's one thing, and regulators do look for that sort of thing, the separation of duties. They want to know who does what, and are they trained to be doing it? Are they certified to be doing it? That's a big question in the DoD is 8570 compliance. Are your sysadmins certified? Are your network admins certified? So where we have separation of duties and we now have the blurring of the lines between those separations, we've had to sort of enforce some controls. As far as managing the VMs versus the physical machines, no, we manage them exactly the same. In fact, VMware has made it a little easier, a little more secure, because we can set permissions, where a sysadmin could technically walk into the data center and fire up a KVM and see the console, whatever good that would do them, of any machine that they wanted to. Now we can actually enforce permissions in vCenter to say that you don't have access to even know this machine exists. So it's improved it a little bit.
And some of these policies, I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but some of these policies can be extended, right? So if you have PCI compliance requirements or HIPAA or SOX, you can actually be expanded to things like best practices, like what are the best practices for vSphere deployments, and then you can see what hosts do not meet those best practices and requirements. You talked about people and process. Now, you, Tim, as a manager, I'm sure this is now more on top of mind for you. Have you seen a shift or a change in how you structure your teams, or what people are doing differently than before? Do server admins still just do server administration, or do they move up the stack? Do they take on more responsibilities from a networking standpoint? Where do you draw the line between what your team is responsible for, and where do you hand off to other teams like the application owners?
Well, I think we've actually done a lot of training with our network folks and our security folks and even our exchange, and brought them into VMworld and kind of said, here's what VMworld is, this is what VMware does, and kind of train from that level. We also have like a virtualization center of excellence where it's kind of the heavy players of each group get together weekly, bi-weekly, and talk about what works, what doesn't, what's our architect for the future. Because if you talk to a normal sysadmin and their thoughts about Nexus 1000V, they're talking one language, and the network folks think something completely different. So it's a matter of getting the interested people together, making a decision based on what's best for the company. I mean, that's one avenue. As far as the other side, I think we still have our system admins that are doing the builds. We brought in some college hires this year. And running ESXi, we've taught these college hires within the first 2 weeks, they're building hosts. I mean, it's such a process that, like we said, we can give them a little book, they can do it, they can grow with it, and the engineers and the architects can actually spend time doing other things.
Mm-hmm. Great. Are there any questions in the audience at this point? Anybody wants to have any questions? Okay, go ahead, sir.
How do you do charge back on your network as compared to just the system? Do you charge back for like hospital?
Yeah,
So let me repeat the question so everybody can hear it. So how do you charge back for the network, and internet access?
So we're not set up to actually do kind of network bandwidth utilization chargeback. What we are doing from a network component is port cost. So we know what our port cost is, and we figure that into our chargeback model for what it takes to hook up that virtual machine or hook up that physical machine. But we're not at a state today where we're actually able to charge back via the chargeback tool for that bandwidth. Each one of our business units or our entities has a dedicated connection back to our data center. So that network connection gets charged back to them, but not as part of the chargeback tool or utility.
So there is an important point here that you guys are actually not doing the billing just yet, or the invoicing for services. At this point, you're at the point of showback, understanding what is the consumption and the value, and also maybe figuring out what are the things that make sense to include in a consumption-based model versus what are some of the fixed costs or part of facilities, right?
Absolutely.
Because the building, the infrastructure, oftentimes it comes out of different budgets anywhere other than IT. And then there's also the other question about what about the upfront investment that you need to make in your server infrastructure anyway, and the ongoing maintenance or even upgrades. At what point do you say, we apply a 3-year period to recoup our costs, and then everything else after that is going to be used to make future investments, right? I think this is still one of the open questions as well. Okay.
The other question I had was on the standard server that you have, a 1 gig, 1 virtual processor. Are your apps not Java-based? And the reason I say that is because the current JVM out there is 1.1 gig in memory footprint, so you immediately go into swap.
Yeah.
About 1 gig.
So for us, the majority of our apps are pretty basic in the healthcare space, and that's why I was saying, our standards won't necessarily be everybody's standards, right? It is for what we found when we went into virtualization in 2006. When we did our study, we found that we were utilizing less than 10% of the processing power in our data center, and we were using about less than 15% of our memory in our data center. So for us, we had to significantly shrink what our medical apps in our environment are utilizing. And so in our environment, we don't have a lot of apps and servers that are using that much memory or processing. And in some cases, those 10% that deviate from our standard, we make that adjustment.
Okay. Next question. Question about backup. Do you do much vMotion? Yeah, maybe this is a question for everybody here on the panel. What's your DR strategy?
I mean, we're definitely implementing SRM right now in certain sites. vMotion, I don't think an environment of any of us, we definitely have to do vMotion. So definitely vMotion. DR, we're doing snaps on our VMDK files, on our NetApps, and then getting SRM in some of the facilities.
And then you, John, and
And
Robert?
my answer is like exactly the same as Tim. You can't have DRS without vMotion, and you can't have a good load-balanced and reliable cluster without DRS. So we're definitely using the vMotion, and all of our DR is done with snaps between NetApps, and we're also evaluating SRM for both sites. So.
And honestly, I'm in the same boat they are. A lot of our stuff
ditto.
is just being, is frame-based. I mean, we use NetApps as well, and I mean, our backups are traditional. I mean, we still have an agent that sits on our virtual machines that we're backing up just like we did when they were physical. That's just the methodology that our company feels like they feel safe with. So we're still doing that traditional. Now, we are moving into the SRM arena and looking at a different backup kind of strategy, but today that's what we're doing.
Okay, so I think we talked a lot about IT service delivery today, and what was your approach or your take on service delivery overall? I think this is kind of like the carrot that hangs in front of us or dangles in front of us as we talk about the cloud a lot. Now, as we were preparing for this, I think John, you mentioned to me, what's the one key takeaway that you want people to remember from an IT service delivery standpoint, security standpoint? What's the one thing that people should consider as they move towards more of an IT service model?
One of the most important things that you have to remember as you shift from selling servers to selling service, IT as a service, is that it requires buy-in from not only from management but also from your customers, be they internal or external. Not everybody has external customers that you have to satisfy, but your individual departments, your finance department, your bookkeeping, your accounting, everybody, they're all departments. Those are all your customers, and they all have to accept. You have to have buy-in from everybody, and it's a multi-threaded application, if you will, getting everybody to agree that this is how they're going to shift to it. And then you also, at the same time, have to make sure that you're comfortable with the new roles that your operations, that your engineering teams are going to have to take on.
And then, Robert, from your perspective, what's the most important thing that you want people to remember from this talk today?
Well, I think for us, I think everybody is so fast to move to, whether I can say I'm at 50% virtualized, or I can say I'm at 75% virtualized, or I can say I'm in the cloud. I think the one thing that I would say is take a step back and make sure your plan for implementation is in place. Because the one thing that I see from a lot of folks, and then just talking here or anywhere, is the planning phase seems to get skipped a lot. How do I get where I want to go? And when I finally get there, am I really where I wanted to be? So take a step back and make sure that planning phase is really detailed and you know exactly how you want to do it from an infrastructure and what your end result is going to be. And I think if you can do that, you'll be more successful when you get to the end result.
The one thing that I'd like to add here is, and the point you pointed this one out earlier, is get help. Don't be afraid to use your service credits that you might have as part of your contract. Get help from consultants or professional services or partners that have an expertise in service delivery and in security, compliance, that sort of thing.
Or I'd even say the VMware user groups has been really, really helpful, and I think most cities have their user groups, which have been great, finding other peers that actually work with things. That's definitely helped us. We've kind of started a more advanced one in Minneapolis, and just to bounce ideas off, because the way that I operate is obviously a little bit different than the way that they do. My size is different than Joe's bait shop, so finding people that are similar. So I guess that might be one of my takeaways. My other takeaway would just be, give application owners what they need and not what they want. Work with them to trim a little bit, to get your ratios higher, to use less hardware and everything else. But every single application owner that I've met, they always want more. They think that more is better. And again, we mentioned that it's not always better. A lot of our Citrix boxes, they're running 4 processors. It was terrible running 4. Bump them back to 1, and they run much more efficiently. So just give them what they need and not necessarily what they want.
And in order to do that, information is king, and being able to measure and understand where are you today, and before you can figure out what you can optimize. I think there was one more question back here, yeah?
The question I have is that out of your own cloud, your own virtual environment, have you looked at what pieces and what parts you could possibly deploy into public clouds? Have you considered those options as well?
So have you considered deploying pieces of your infrastructure into a public cloud type environment?
We're not there yet, I know that much. So I don't know if you guys have it all.
Definitely not allowed to do that.
Not in the government.
Way too regulated.
For us, we've looked at it, but we didn't have a business case for it. We're not a high development shop that needs to spin up cycles very quickly to do some heavy development. So for us, it doesn't make a lot of business sense from our virtualized environment in the public cloud. When we've got some other things that might move out into the public cloud, but not our virtualized environment.
We'll revisit the question next year. We'll see if their answer is different. There was another question. Okay. The other thing is, I think it's important to distinguish between public cloud and software as a service, because I think almost everybody here has applications that are not owned by IT, that are served up by service providers, and we have this in VMware, so don't confuse the two. Okay, any last call for questions? So we talked a lot about tools. We didn't go into a lot of deep dive on this. If you'd like to learn more about some of these tools that Tim, John, and Robert talked about today, I've highlighted a couple sessions here that I would recommend you attend. Many of these sessions have repeat sessions this afternoon and tomorrow, so please check your program guides to learn more about vCenter Configuration Manager, vCenter Chargeback, or Capacity IQ, or even Site Recovery Manager as discussed. Also, there is a session around self-service and workflow automation for the private cloud. This is in conjunction with some of the keynote announcements we made around Project Sydney. And also yesterday, and the session has been recorded, there was one of our VPs gave a talk on VMware's vision for IT management. So definitely check it out as you come back to the VMware.com site after the conference to read up on sessions you could not attend because of time reasons. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists, Tim, Marcel, John Schulman, and Robert Thomas for being here, for speaking to us about their deployments. I also want to encourage you to, if you have any ideas, questions, suggestions, if you'd like to be on a panel next year, please drop me notes, send me an email. You can see my email address up here on the screen. Also, check out the blog. We have a group blog at VMware focused on Rethink IT, virtualization management. So blogs.vmware.com/Rethink IT to learn more. But with that, I want to thank all of you for attending. I want to thank the panelists for presenting, and I hope you have a good rest of the show today. Thank you.